Hello and welcome back to the I Hit Drums YouTube channel. In a previous lesson, we looked at quarter notes, eighth notes and 16th notes. Today, I actually want to discuss the rests that come with quarter notes and eighth notes. These are the kind of rests that you'll see on a quite regular basis when you're first getting used to reading drum music, particularly grades 1 and 2. And sometimes these rests will be in grooves, sometimes they'll just be within like sticking rhythms, like fills around the kit. So I'll be displaying these different note values and rest values on the screen as I go through them. If you're brand new to the drums and you haven't yet started playing any grooves, you can go to my website, www.ihitdrums.co.uk, and get access to a free groove starter pack just by subscribing to the website. This will give you a few grooves to get you started and also some suggested listening and songs you can maybe play along to. And if you enjoy that, you can maybe also check out my book, which is a grade 1 to 2 book called A Beginner's Guide. This book's going to give you a complete program to work through so that you can learn all of the elements that are needed to play grades 1 and 2 material. Again, you can find that on my website. If you're slightly more advanced and not quite new to drums, then I also have a book called Intermediate 1, and this is written at grade 3 level, so all the elements required to play grade 3 material are in there. But let's get on with today's video, looking at those rests for quarter notes and eighth notes. Now, as well as quarter note and eighth note rests, there are some bigger rests, if you like. There's the semibreve and the minim. The semibreve, which I'll put on the screen now, you'll often see this taking up the space of a whole bar. So if you've got an empty bar within music, you'll see a semibreve rest within there. So this lasts for 4 beats. We don't usually have the semibreve note within drumming. Because the instrument of the drum kit can't really sustain any kind of note length, we rarely see the semibreve within drum music. So this actual note value, we're not going to come across it that much. Occasionally maybe, but often not. But the semibreve rest, you will see this quite regularly. Again, we don't often see the note value for minims within drum music, but we will occasionally see a minim rest. Now this is very similar to the semibreve rest. They're both little kind of square blocks, but the semibreve block is kind of sitting underneath that second from top line, whereas the minim rest is it's sitting on top of the middle line, so it's slightly lower down. And the easiest way to tell if it's a semibreve rest or a minim rest is basically to see if anything else is in the bar. Because the minim rest only lasts for 2 beats, so if you've got that within a bar, then there's a strong chance that there's going to be something else within the bar. Whereas if it's a semibreve rest, then there'll be nothing else in the bar. So the quarter note value itself, we have the note head and then a stem coming off of that. So a single stick coming off that note head. We've already seen these in previous videos and previous drum beats, but its counterpart, if you like, the quarter note rest, as you can see on the screen there, it's kind of a funny squiggle, almost a bit like an S kind of shape or a 3 kind of shape sometimes, but that's usually what that looks like. Now that takes up the same amount of space as a quarter note. So if we look at this exercise, we can see that we've got a quarter note on beat 1, a quarter note on beat 2, a quarter note rest on beat 3, and then a quarter note on beat 4. So that's going to give us 1, 2, 3, 4. If we look at the next bar in this exercise, we've got a quarter note rest on beat 1, and then we've got quarter notes on both 2 and 3, and then another quarter note rest on beat 4. So this second bar is going to give us 1, 2, 3, 4. So put those together, we're going to end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it, quarter note rests. Now, if you had an instance where you had, let's say, a quarter note on beat 1, a quarter note on beat 2, and then for beats 3 and 4, if they were both quarter note rests, that would often actually get changed to the minim rest, because the minim rest, as we said before, lasts for 2 beats. So rather than having 2 quarter note rests next to each other within the same bar, that would often be replaced by the minim rest. Let's look at the eighth note rest now. We know that the note itself, we've got the note head and then the stem coming off of it. And then in addition to that, we have a little tail that comes off. That little tail tells you that it's an eighth note. And when multiple eighth notes are put next to each other, those little tails kind of join up with a line across the top. Now the eighth note rest almost looks like a little sort of number 7. It's a little whoosh, whoosh. This you will see quite a lot within drum beats, especially within changing bass drum patterns. So let's look at another 1-bar exercise below here. And this is where we're going to move from eighth notes and have some eighth note rests within there. So in this exercise, we have eighth note rest on the and of 2 and on the and of 3. So because we're dealing with eighth notes the whole way through, we need to change our counting now to 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So this exercise is going to go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Let's try that again. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So remember that the eighth note rest takes up the same amount of time as an eighth note itself. The main difference between the two is that one makes a sound and one of them doesn't, but the time that they take up is the same. So let's look at another bar. We've got a rest on beat 1 and the and of 3. So that's going to sound like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. If we put those two together, we're going to get 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So eighth note rests. For that last exercise, you won't often actually see that kind of thing written that way. Because if you look at that first bar again, we actually have a hit on beat 2 and then nothing on the and of 2 and then a hit on beat 3 and nothing on the and of 3. So it doesn't really make sense to write that out as eighth notes. What you'd commonly find is you'd have the initial 1 and then for the 2 and, rather than having an eighth note on 2 and then a rest on the and, you'd actually just have a quarter note hit on beat 2. Likewise, the hit on beat 3, you wouldn't have an eighth note on its own followed by the rest on the and. You just have another quarter note in beat 3. So this would actually look more like this. Much easier. You're not actually reading so many rests and notes all the time. You've got 2 eighth notes, a quarter note, 2 eighth notes. And that sounds exactly the same as it did before, only now we're dealing with quarter notes and eighth notes all in the same bar, and actually rests aren't needed in this case. For the second bar that we looked at, there's actually only one instance here where we can switch out an eighth note followed by a rest for a quarter note, and that is the hit that we have on beat 3. So we don't need to have 3 and written as eighth note on 3 and then an eighth note rest. Again, we can just swap this out for a quarter note on beat 3 because that takes up the same space as those 2 eighth notes. We do still need the eighth note at the beginning of this bar though, because the first hit is on the and. And most drum music is presented this way. So when you see an eighth note rest on its own, this will often be followed by an eighth note on the and. And that eighth note rest is usually only used on a number, and then the next hit will be the and. So any eighth note that you find on its own will usually be an and position, and any eighth note rest will usually be on the number. So this is really useful information because what this means is that when you're reading through an exercise that's got quarter notes and eighth notes within it, if you can see any quarter notes, any quarter note rests, or any eighth note rests, all 3 of those are actually falling on number counts. The only thing that's going to be on an and is an eighth note. And this makes reading eighth note and quarter note patterns a lot more easy. Now I should stress that if you're playing a melodic instrument like a piano, this won't be the case. But in drums we can't sustain those note values, so often what you need to think of with drum music is that the note value indicates when you can do the next thing. That entire top line again is going to be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now notice that I'm still counting the and even when I'm not playing an and, because that helps you judge the space between one quarter note and the next quarter note. And for the majority of the exercise you're playing eighth notes anyway, so counting in that eighth note rate is going to be really helpful for you to judge the space between hits. So I hope you found that helpful. So that is note values and their counterpart rests, looking at quarter notes and eighth notes. If there's anything you're not sure about, leave a comment below and I'll try and help you out. Like I said, if you are new to the drums and you want to get started with a few grooves, go to my website www.ihitdrums.co.uk and you can get access to a free groove starter pack to get you started playing a few beats on the drums. But that's all for today, so hope you enjoyed that. Until next time, enjoy!